Welcome to the Elle Bee Show. I'm your host, Elle Bee. So, most of the things that you're about to hear are my opinion. But guess what? We sprinkled in some facts because we're what? Educated bees over here in this hive. Don't forget to check out the website for our resources so you can do some additional research on your own. Now, prepare to be stung, but the solve is not included. All right, so today, as you can see, we have a guest with us right here to my right. This is Dr. Casey Thompson. She is a professor of management at Ferris State University and also the former global director of strategy for the McDonald's Corporation. Now, the last few episodes we were talking about colorism in family, which is, not an easy subject to approach. But today we're going a little deeper and we're talking about colorism in education. Now, that is a topic that we know is sensitive. We know is highly regarded because of the history of education of Black people in America. And today we're going to dive into that. So I'm so glad that Dr. Casey is here. She is also part of the team here at Elle Bee Productions. So she helps do the research. She's the educated bee.
We're all educated bees.
We all educated bees, but that's her name, the educated bee. So we're going to dive right into it. I want to start with this quote by Alice Walker. In 1983, Alice Walker used the term colorism to describe presidential and preferential treatment of same-race people based solely on their color. Now, in education, we know how that can have an impact on our children and determines what their future will be. So in the context of education, what is colorism?
So it's actually the same thing in context of education, but I think the one thing that so many people miss is that under this colorism is also physical traits. So physical traits would include nose size, lip size, eye color, hair texture. And what people don't understand is that you'll have people say, well, no, I'm not a colorist. I treat all people the same. I don't see... But all of those characteristics also play into colorism.
Right.
And that is where so many hidden blind spots occur, especially in education.
Right.
Especially.
So in my formative years, my full educational background, I went to school with mostly Black kids. I grew up in Detroit. So I grew up in a city. I grew up in a city, so all of my elementary school kids, most of the kids were Black. Middle school, most of the kids were Black. High school, most of the kids were Black. I think in my graduating class, shout out to Cass Tech, there were 530 something of us. There were maybe 20 to 30 kids that were not Black.
Wow. Okay.
Everybody else.
So that's very Black.
Everybody else was Black. So
Black.
we was extra Black up in that thing.
Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't until I got to higher education when I went to college because I went to a PWI, where I saw the differences, which we are going to talk about that later.
Yeah.
But in the younger years, for me, I didn't really have that experience of, there's nobody that looks like me. Most of my teachers were also Black. I had a few teachers that were white. My science teacher at elementary school, she was a white lady. Mad cool, though, and she made science fun.
Oh, okay.
So shout out to her.
Shout out.
But my English, all my other teachers, they were mostly older Black women. I had one Black male teacher, the choir director, or the music teacher, excuse me. And then in middle school, I had one Black male teacher. And in high school, I had maybe 5 or 6. There were a ton of Black male teachers, but it was only a few.
Can I push you on that? So just because, we had sort of this Black kind of insulated environment, colorism was not is not exclusive to non-Black environments.
That is very
right?
true.
So, and especially when you just gave us the Alice Walker definition,
right?
And understanding that colorism involves all of these other characteristics that are so often like implicit bias that we're kind of bringing in, right, from our lived experiences. I would actually challenge that you probably faced as much. And in some cases, even more, but at least some level of equivalency in colorism, even in that environment.
And I probably did, but didn't know that that's what was going on.
That's what you were experiencing,
because the thing about implicit bias, which let's talk about that for a moment.
Okay.
Because implicit bias is not something that people really are aware that it's happening when it's happening, because it's a subconscious thing.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't learn about implicit bias until I went to grad school. And it's not because, you know, it was something I never heard of. It was because it was not something that was really talked about. But when you dive deeper into implicit bias, you don't think about all of the things that impact how you view the world.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just what's happening at home. It's your family,
Absolutely.
of course, but it's also your school, your teachers, church, any community organizations you belong to, your neighbors, your friends, your distant relatives that you see every blue moon, and be like, why would you do that?
But that, okay, so let's bring that back to education.
Right.
Because so many, to build on that point, so many teachers, you enter the profession because you want, you know, to make this difference. You want to be a part of, you know, bringing up and raising and teaching and educating, you know, our next generation of leaders.
Right.
So this sort of like this altruistic kind of mindset where you're like, and I'm generalizing, right? Generalizing. I'm doing this because I love. I'm doing this because I want to make a, you know, a social impact. I'm doing, but if your environment kind of, you've been reared in this environment, and then now you find yourself doing all of these things you think you wanted to do for these students that don't look like you, it is so incredibly difficult if you don't do sort of that introspective work. It is so incredibly difficult not to have some level of it's almost impossible.
It is
not to have some level of implicit bias.
It is. It can be impossible, especially when you, as the leader of a class, the leader of students, the leader of, you know, shaping these minds for the future and all of that other kind of stuff. You know, if you're going into it well, because, you know, little Johnny over here in the corner is super light bright, but, you know, Joshua or Quentin or whatever is like extra chocolatey, he's going to be the troublemaker. He's going to be the one that is in trouble with the police in the future. He's going to be the one that, you know, ends up in a place or a situation where he shouldn't be. So I'm not going to give him the amount of attention that he deserves because he's already headed down a dark path.
Yeah. And that is so stereotypical.
Exactly.
Right? And it's so filled with just horrible stereotypes.
Exactly.
Which also can be manifested via like implicit bias reactions or those triggers, right? So even in studying for our segment on colorism or this entire season on colorism, there are multiple studies that talk about, you know, racism in education, racism in K through 12, you know, all of these, you know, pipeline to prison type of conversations. But there are very few that actually tease out the colorism. And there was a study back in 2013 where it was actually, you know, documented that darker skinned girls were 3 times more likely to be suspended for the exact same infraction that a lighter skinned Black girl would have. Those are the kind of studies that we need to be having now.
And there needs to be more of that, especially when it comes to hair.
And it goes back to the characteristic part, right?
Exactly. Recently, in the last, I want to say maybe 2 years or so, we've seen a lot of things on social media where it's talking about, you know, coaches, teachers are cutting out people's natural locks.
That in 2023.
Exactly.
In 2023, that is happening.
Exactly.
So,
and it's just like, this is the natural state of my hair. so there's nothing wrong with it. But it goes into like so many other things, because when you talk about implicit bias and you see like a lot of times when people see a person of color with locks, they think that they're like a drug dealer, or they smoke a lot of weed, or they're a Rastafarian, which is nothing wrong
I'm neither
with
of the three, which is all good. It's but I rock my locks proudly.
Exactly.
But what's so interesting about this is just yesterday, and we're filming this in May, so just yesterday, the governor of Kentucky actually made it a law to discriminate based on, why do we need that in 2024?
I mean, that is a great point, because, we don't really need provisions on our hair in 2024.
You should not have, right.
Definitely not.
Right.
But I do want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about why colorism is still in the classroom, because there are so many things, like I'm an 80s baby. You don't have to say, when you were, but I'm an 80s baby. So I grew up in that era where, because I grew up in a city, it was just like, that's all I knew. Yeah. My whole neighborhood was black. Yeah. My church was black. Yeah. That was all I knew. We had one Indian girl, like not Native American Indian, but like Indian. Her family, Eastern her family was from India. Yeah, okay, right. And she had like extremely long hair, and I remember distinctively that we were in class one day, and her hair got caught in the chair, and the teacher had to cut like a little snippet of her hair because she couldn't stand up otherwise. She was so like distraught, because it was a religious thing, and we didn't think anything of it. Like, we never had issues. We never thought of her as any different. She was just like, oh, she's from another country, but she's still cool. Like, yeah. But it's not like that for a lot of people. If you don't grow up, like, Detroit is a chocolate city. Like, DC is a chocolate city. Atlanta is a chocolate city. Baltimore is a chocolate city. So if you don't grow up in that type of environment to where your formative years, you're surrounded by your people all the time, you don't know what that is until you get into that higher level of education. But for those that didn't, like yourself, because you're from Gary, it's a little different. So let's talk about the colorism in the classroom.
So we'll do that, but just one really quick thing that you said about that experience that not only affected that student, your peer, but it affected you, because you are still having like this kind of visceral reaction to it. Right. Witnessing it. So fast forward, so that was her little piece of hair, her little piece of lock was cut out of a necessity. Right. Almost because, not survival, she's not going to die because she's caught in the chair, but it was an emergency. Imagine the trauma that young wrestler faced in Texas, who had to have all of his locks cut because somebody didn't like him. Right. It wasn't a matter of...
they thought it was inappropriate.
Yeah, or inappropriate. Yeah. Do you understand the trauma?
Right. I've been growing my locks for years. They're trying to stop kids from graduating from high school.
The trauma.
Because of the locks. And it's just like, this is my hair in a natural state.
This child had a little bit cut so that she could actually stand up and go on with her day. These young black children are having their hair cut because somebody else doesn't find them acceptable. Trauma. So we digress. So the classroom,
right? Because we could really get into a conversation about hair, because I have stories since I've had my locks. But we're gonna get back to the we're getting back to the classroom.
Let it go.
For right now.
For now.
For now.
It's so far. I was just thinking. For now.
All
right. So thinking about statistics, right? So 2019. Of all of public school teachers in the U.S. specifically, because another digression, we can talk global, but we'll keep it in the U.S., 7% were actually black.
Right. Which is a disgrace.
7%.
Well, I do understand why a lot of black people don't go into education anymore, because they don't pay teachers anything.
And the lack of respect.
And there's a lack of respect.
A whole nother segment.
And they don't even make money.
A whole nother segment.
You want me to deal with all this bull?
A whole nother segment.
That's a whole thing.
But 7% back in 2019 were black. 80% were white. So, not making excuses, but we are academics on the team. So, we're always looking to understand things at different levels, right? Not to make excuses, but just to understand. It's going to be incredibly difficult when you have 80% of a white teacher base to truly, without intentionality, to truly relate to, be sensitive to, ask the right questions, understand all of the dynamics that are in play for these young Black students coming up. If I don't live your experience, why should I even care? I'm not saying that's right, but I'm just saying the mindset. Right. It's not hard to kind of make that leap and say, yeah, these kids are still going through it.
Of course they are. And it's unfortunate that, one, there is a lack of diversity in the educational system as far as the people that are educators. Right. It's sad that also people don't go into this profession because there is a lack of them getting paid what they should be paid. Right. When you have everybody, and it doesn't matter what you do for a living, you had to be taught by somebody to help you get to the point to where you are.
Absolutely.
I have a lot of teachers that I have respected and admired over the years that have really changed my thoughts, my way of thinking, my way of applying how I do things to my life. Yeah. I have a teacher who, she is now a counselor. Shout out to MJ. Hey, MJ.
She was MJ before MJ.
Well,
or during MJ?
During MJ.
Okay.
So Miss Jones, who was my 10th grade English teacher. Okay. She made it so much fun. She introduced me to a lot of Black artists.
Isn't that beautiful?
She's amazing.
That's so beautiful.
She's amazing. Her room was the hangout room. Yeah. Now, mind you, okay, she was, I think, like in her early 30s when she started teaching. Okay. And now that I'm an adult, she's like, you can call me Monica. And I was like, I can't.
No, you still.
It's a respect thing. Yeah. You're Miss Jones. She's just like, okay, just call me MJ. Don't call me Miss Jones because you make me feel old. And I'm just like, I get it. But I don't think, I probably would have got here. I just wouldn't have gotten there as fast as I did if it wasn't for her.
And I think that story is so vitally important when you think about the 7% of public school teachers just as of a few years ago were Black. Right. The critical role that teacher plays above and beyond just core curriculum.
Right.
The cultural, the
expanding
maturing,
your mind,
the inspiration, like so many, the maternal, paternal, whatever. Right. It is so many roles that educators play. And the irony, and this isn't a funny haha, but what's so crazy about this is that was really the one profession that we disproportionately went to college to become.
Of course.
For decades, you become a teacher. Right. That was the natural progression.
That was like one of the few things, like you're either going to be a teacher. Right. Or a nurse. Yes. A secretary.
Yes. But as far as going into higher education, which is a later segment. Right. But yeah, that was the jewel, the crown jewel of our community.
Just like, I'm going to be a teacher.
You are a teacher?
I'm a teacher.
Oh my God.
Exactly. Like and you're the best creme de la creme.
And now it's, I'm a teacher. I'm looking for that side hustle. I'm looking for it. But
and the thing, the sad part is that the teachers have to have a side hustle in the first place.
Well,
but that's another conversation.
That's a whole nother.
That's another conversation.
I was thinking about, so we're talking about 7% as of a few years ago are Black. I'm thinking about this one study. And you just said absolutely nothing that triggered this, because usually there's a segue. There is no segue.
Okay.
I'm chewing bubble gum and walking at the same time. But I'm thinking about this study where preschool teachers were monitored. They were monitored, or observed, I should say. They were observed to try to understand how they kind of disciplined, preschool. So preschool is what, 3 through 5, basically?
Something like that.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
44% of their attention, not because the students were doing anything, it's that implicit bias coming back. 44% of their attention was directed towards young black boys, while only 13% of their attention went to white girls. So if I am spending, I'm going to round up. If I actually 50 is not a roundup, but I'm going to do it anyway. If I'm spending almost half my time focused on one group of students because of my implicit or explicit bias, I'm giving them a buy by saying implicit, because it might not be implicit. It just might be racist bias. If I'm spending almost half my time looking at what this black student is doing at a preschool level, of course something's going to happen.
Right. Of course. Of course.
But then that stereotype follows that young black boy all the way through.
All through his whole life, unfortunately. It's so
all the way through. So, I mean, what do we do about it? Or what's happening now? That
is always the question of what we do and how we make it better.
Absolutely.
So, while we're trying to figure out a solution of how we can make things better, we want you to be a part of that conversation of how we can make things better. So here's our food for thought for today, for you to mull over. Education, it does start at home, but it is reinforced in the schoolhouse. So if you are an educator and you're watching this video, how are you making things better for your students so that they don't feel like they are challenged with things that don't have anything to do with what they should be learning in school? Their skin color should not be an issue for them when they're in school. They are there to learn, and you are there to teach. That's really what it is. So come back next week because, we got more stuff to talk about.
That we do.
Thanks for tuning in to the Elle Bee Show. Make sure you share, subscribe, and sound off. I hope you got some. Who knew it could feel so good?